Hi, welcome to this video about social control, conformity, and resistance, part of the series that I'm doing to cover socialization and the creation of a social identity. In my previous video of this series, I covered the process of learning and socialization, so I suggest if you haven't watched that already, you pause this video and go check that first. So within this part of the unit, we're going to cover structure and agency, factors explaining why people conform to social expectations, mechanisms through which power is maintained, and how sociologists explain deviance and nonconformity. So within structure and agency, what you need to know is that there's basically two main theories. There's interactionalism and structuralism. So interactionalists, they believe that individuals control and create society. That means people have agency, so they can make their own choices. And so when studying sociology, they tend to look at individuals. So that's called a micro-sociological approach because it looks into society in the small scale, so individuals. On the other hand, structuralists, they believe that society controls individuals, so through social institutions such as education, family, religion, media, etc., individuals are actually socialized and they're controlled. So they implement social control, as we've looked in different videos. And then they take a macro sociological approach. That means they focus on the larger part of society, which is social institutions, to study why people behave the way they do. So, key sociologists, just to illustrate their points more, for interactionalists, we have Goffman. He believes that individuals perform and actively construct their own identities. This goes back to the idea that we have an agency and we control how we act. Schutz, he argues that social interaction is based on subjective meanings, and here the thing is that because subjective meanings are subjective, they basically are open to negotiation. So that means that they can easily change. And obviously, then they're in control of people and society. And then Wrong argues, he coins the term over socialized conception of man to criticize the approach that humans are basically a response to socialization. He says that that is too deterministic and that people have power over how they act. They're not just a product of their socialization. So, into structuralism, there's two branches. It's divided into two. So, there's conflict structuralism and consensus structuralism. So, the conflict part or branch, they believe that, yes, social institutions determine people's behavior. No, they look still at the macro sociological approach in society, but they believe that these institutions socialize people into norms and values of a dominant group. So then within this, there's two perspectives. There's Marxism, who believes that this dominant group is the upper class, the bourgeoisie, and feminists, who believe that that is men, so the patriarchy. And then into the consensus one, they believe, yes, it's true that social institutions socialize individuals and determine how they act, but that is for the benefit of everyone. So people are socialized into what they call a value consensus. And the main perspective is functionalist, and they would argue value consensus ensures that everyone integrates in society, that society functions with order, and that it can keep going. So into each of these, we're going to start with Marxism. Marxism. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing this right. They argue that the bourgeoisie, which are the upper class, control the means of production. And means of production refers to capital, so money, resources in general, machines, etc. However, the proletariat, which are the working class, they only own the forces of production. So that basically means their ability to work. So consequently, the lower class are exploited by the upper class to maximize the upper class profits. And the theory goes even deeper into explaining how come this system keeps on going without people opposing to it. So they argue that the upper class also own ideological state apparatus and repressive state apparatus. So in terms of ideological state apparatus, they believe that each social institution socializes people into the norms and values of capitalism. So accepting it's the best system, that it's fair. That's called false class consciousness, the belief that either the system is fair or that they can't change it. So that makes people not opposed to it, as they either don't see it or don't believe that they can change it. And then repressive state apparatus, it does the same function. Like it avoids people going against the system, but in a different way. So repressive state apparatus refers to those groups that use force, such as the police or the army, that could possibly use force against people who actually do resist, perhaps seeing through false class consciousness. So through these two things, they prevent people from uprising against the system. So key sociologists in Marxism, again, to illustrate more the point, because then for each unit, when you go into family, education, and religion, you'll cover lots more. But just to illustrate now as a form of introduction. So the most famous one is Marx, who is the founder of the ideology. So he was the one who coined the terms proletariat and bourgeoisie. Then we have Althusser. He was the one who also coined the terms ideological state apparatus and repressive state apparatus. You could also say ISA for short and RSA for short, as was in the previous slide. And then lastly, Engels, he was the one who coined the terms false class consciousness. So always you should reference them if using their terms, if using their ideas. So next we have feminism. So they argue society is patriarchal, and they believe that male power is expressed in two ways. So we have interpersonal and cultural. So interpersonal refers to in the family, and cultural is in society. So again, in social institutions such as the workplace, schools, religion, etc. And then feminism is divided into three branches. So we have liberal, who believe that we don't still have equality, but they want to achieve that, but they want to achieve it without changing the system. Radical, then, they focus a lot on patriarchy, and they believe that we need radical change. And Marxists believe that women are exploited double by the patriarchy and by capitalism. So, just some key sociologists for feminism. We have Duncombe and Marston, who believe women perform triple shifts. That means that they do paid work at the family, like domestic work, such as cleaning, cooking, and then emotional work, which refers to like balancing out everyone's emotions, speaking to their husbands and their children. And that also is called a triple burden, because obviously it can be very tiring. Then Simone Beauvoir, she argues that in religion, men have dominance, control, and oppression over women, and they use what she calls divine authority to ensure that. And Heaton and Lawson argue that the hidden curriculum in education teaches patriarchal values. But again, for each social institution, we're going to cover like for each theory a lot more in later videos. This is just to introduce them. And then functionalists, they believe that the organization of society, as we said before, ensures order and stability. So, for example, they say that we have four functional subsystems in society. So, political, and that creates order. Economic ensures physical survival, as we organize like the resources we have, and everyone does a job. Cultural ensures social integration, as because everyone has the same norms, values, beliefs, everyone kind of fits in with each other and there's no conflicts. And family socialization into the very norms and values of mainstream culture. That's quite connected. So they look into society as a body analogy. What this means is that each social institution for them is like an organ that has to run properly for society to be healthy, to run smoothly. So they believe that if one social institution, let's say the family or education, isn't working right, then society is kind of going to collapse. They believe that all social institutions are essential for the running of society. So some key sociologists for functionalists, we have Parsons, who's the one who kind of brought the idea of the functional subsystems. Murdoch, this would be for religion. He says that religion ensures that there's social integration by creating what he calls collective consciousness. And Durkheim says that in education, children learn social solidarity. So collective consciousness is that people are all aware of what's right and what's wrong. And if everyone believes that the same things are right and wrong, obviously there's going to be a lot of order and social integration. And social solidarity refers more to a sense of companionship. And that's also very essential for society, for people not to live very like solidarity, like we need people to work with each other and to be empathetical to each other. Okay, and lastly, we have structuration. And this is not exactly in the syllabus, but it's good to know. This is a theory developed by Guidance. Well, I'm not sure if it's in the syllabus or not. Don't take me on that, because maybe the syllabus I did has changed from the one now. But, anyways, it's useful to know. And basically, this theory combines structure and action. So, Guidance says that actually both are important. So, we should study society looking at macro sociological, like taking a macro sociological approach and a micro sociological approach. So moving on to the next part of this section, looking at why people conform in society. So we have sanctions, and this is a pretty straightforward one. Obviously, I'm going to give a very like simple introduction to each of these, but then for each, you would need to have sociologists, and if you could bring in theories like Marxism and feminism, postmodernist, functionalist for each of them. But just as a form of introduction, sanctions, you could go into how they can be positive and negative, carried out by formal or informal agencies of social control, and then possibly go into examples and then related to theories, etc. For social pressure, you can talk about how wanting to belong to a group and avoid being ostracized and marginalized is a very powerful feeling, and kind of it ensures that people conform. Self-interest, that what comes into this is that in order to survive we need to cooperate with others in society, and we're likely to engage in a cost benefit analysis. So that means we're rather like we'll weigh up, like, okay, if I conform, do I have more to win or to lose? And most of the time we have more to win. So for self-interest, we might also conform. And lastly, social exchange. So that's kind of really similar, but it relates to how members of society are likely to behave more civil towards each other, because that will ensure that others behave civil in return. So maintenance of order, we have power, and into power you can talk how there's different types of power, force, coercive power, consensual power, how in modern societies it's more subtle than in the past, because now, for example, with the media or with surveillance cameras, there's more ways that we can be controlled than in the past. Ideology, so you can talk about how dominant ideologies can be imposed by really powerful groups in power, and they ensure order. So, for example, you could talk about Marxists, so you could go into false class consciousness, how it's spread by ideological state apparatus, etc. And then for force, very similar, you can also bring in Marxists. You can talk about the repressive state apparatus, including the police and the armed forces, and how that can ensure order. And for consensus, you could actually bring functionalists and say how order is maintained by a consensus, like of values and norms, which social institutions ensure. Um, and you can say, actually, if norms and values change, as we looked at the first video, sorry, if opinion changes within society, those norms and values can also change, but they're still the same for everyone. That's what's key. So, looking into deviance and nonconformity. So, in subcultures, you can talk how subcultures might have values and norms which come into conflict with mainstream culture just because they are different. So, whilst the members of subcultures might be conforming to their own norms and values, those might clash with the mainstream culture. And it actually, if you look how they act, they might not be following the norms and values of the mainstream culture. They might be clashing with them. They might be defiant, but actually they're not being defiant in their own subculture. Then under socialization, so if you're not socialized right, if children are not socialized right, for example, feral children or just children who've not been socialized in, for example, the new right would argue that in all families except the nuclear family, children are under socialized, right? They might not have moral values clear or know the difference between right and wrong. They might not have the ability to judge what's appropriate behavior in different situations. So that can lead to deviance and nonconformity, even though it's not intentional. Then marginalization. These people might not have a reason to conform if they feel that society can't do anything for them, if they've been pushed to the margins of society. Again, it would be really useful to bring in more studies. Cultural deprivation. So if you're not, like, what comes into here is that if you don't have the values, norms, the qualities you need to be successful, the right attitudes, then if you can't have success, you're possibly led to deviance and nonconformity to survive. For example, if you can't have a job because, for example, you prefer immediate gratification rather than delayed, or have restricted speech codes. We'll go into all of these in later videos, right? But if you're put in an unfair or disprivileged position, you might be led to, for example, steal to survive. And lastly, social resistance. So this refers to how people might go against oppressive groups. Example, feminists might go against patriarchy, or Marxists against the bourgeoisie. And in rising up and going against them, they might commit some acts of deviance and certainly nonconformity. So, looking into exam questions. Oh, this is not the right slide, but exam questions that you might get, and let me just go back now. You could get, okay, so you would always get for this, like, really, really popular questions are, they would ask, to what extent is, and then one of these, so for example, social pressure, the best explanation for social conformity. But you could get that question with any of these 4 points. These are the only actually 4 points you could get in your answer, because the other ones provided by the syllabus. Then similarly, you could get here, so to what extent is force the best explanation for why order is maintained, or the maintenance of order, or you get it with either of the other three. And then in deviance and nonconformity, again, to what extent is cultural deprivation, for example, the best explanation for deviance and nonconformity. Be careful, because sometimes they might word them differently, but it is always going to be one of these points, because those are the ones provided by the syllabus. So I suggest you practice lots of these, and and then that's really something that you really have on hand. So that's the end of this video. I hope you found this lesson useful. If you have, please subscribe, like, and share with any classmates or friends who might also find it useful. And if you have any questions or suggestions, let me know in the comments.